Elections should be free, fair, and regular. Our next guest reminds us of this principle in a new column posted at carolinajournal.com. Dr. Andy Jackson is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. And Andy, those are important items within our elections, free, fair, and regular. One of the key pieces of your column is the fact that while we talk about free and fair, we don't talk as much about regular.
Yeah, that's true. In a certain sense, here in the United States, we've been spoiled, and I mean that in a good way, in that we have set terms for our leaders, and we also have set periods of elections. And so that's something that we kind of take advantage of without really knowing about it. I mean, that's something that not everybody has. To give an extreme example, Hamas, who has control of Gaza, they were essentially elected to office in Gaza, but they haven't had another election in 15 years. So that is a right that has been clearly denied to the people living on the Gaza Strip. And it's something that, we've just always enjoyed and hardly ever think about it.
In fact, this is something that's built into our state constitution. As you mentioned in the column, Article 1, Section 9 of the North Carolina Constitution talks about having these free and fair elections on a regular basis.
They do, and we, in general, fulfill it. We have set times set by statute by the General Assembly to have our elections and our primary elections. And there are very rare occasions where you have some event come up where you cannot have the election at the regularly scheduled time. Example, if a hurricane hits, we might have to adjust early voting hours. That happens with some regularity in North Carolina. Another concrete example is when we had the runoff primary in 2020 in the 11th district. They ended up delaying that for a couple of months just because they didn't know exactly how they were going to conduct that second primary or runoff election during the coronavirus. And so they pushed it back a couple of months, and they discovered, yes, we can conduct safely an election. But those are kind of the exceptions that prove the rule. In general, basically when you're going to be having an election and you're going to vote in it.
The key point of the column was that we don't really think about the regular elections much until, and here was the line in the column, unless or until that right is threatened. And the reason that you write that is because there was a discussion about delaying municipal elections. Tell us about that.
That's true. Municipal elections are held in odd years. They're going to take place this fall. And so we are expecting those to take place as normally, but there is a potential problem. The Census Bureau has been delayed in getting some of its data to North Carolina and to the cities. And for some cities, we have about a little over 500 municipalities that are going to be holding elections this year. There's about 60 of them that use districts. And so they may not, or will probably not, have the data they need to adjust those districts. And for those municipalities, they have to make a hard choice, whether or not they're going to deny voters their right to have the elections at the regularly appointed time, or potentially deny people the right to equal representation if the populations have shifted in the cities to the point where the districts no longer have the same equality that they once did.
You point out in this column that you were disappointed to see a recommendation from the person who serves as the executive director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections about how to address this.
Right. Karen Brinson Bell, she's the executive director of State Board of Elections, went to the General Assembly and recommended that all elections be delayed. And the reason that's unfortunate, of course, is that you're denying people the right to their regular elections. Even though there's no gain, there's no districts that they have, they're not losing anything by having them in the fall. She had a couple of reasons, basically wanting to make sure there's no confusion, because, what if Raleigh delays this election, but Nightingale does not? I'll be particular to Wake County in that example. But we're looking at a fundamental right, and a fundamental right to have your regular elections at the regular time for people to serve their regular terms. There's essentially a contract between voters and people they vote for that I'm going to elect you at this time and you're going to serve a set term, at which point I can evaluate you and then have another election at a specified time. And the state board executive director was seeking to actually renege on that agreement by pushing them back until next year.
You point out, though, that the General Assembly, at least for some of those in the Senate, have come up with a proposal that would address the problem, but in a better way.
That would basically, it would give cities that have districts the option to delay their elections. Because, you know, this is not something where you are having an unadulterated good if you're trying to, say, fix a district. Because if you're denying people their regular right to vote at the specified time, you're essentially denying voting rights. So cities really have to look, the cities that have districts really have to look and see which is going to be the greater harm, either in working with the old districts or in having a delay so that you can rewrite the districts. For the other 500 or almost 500 municipalities, there is no conflict. There is no reason for those places to delay their elections. And I think for that reason, the General Assembly's idea, at least this bill that hopefully will be passed by the General Assembly, is a much better idea.
As someone who monitors election policy across North Carolina, does it make sense to leave these decisions about the particular municipal races in the hands of those local governments and communities? Does it make sense to say we're going to treat this on a case-by-case basis?
Obviously, there's a risk if people in power are trying to use this as a way. Well, maybe we can hold on to power a little bit longer, or it's more advantageous for us to have these elections earlier rather than later. There's a danger there, but I think it's a greater danger in trying to force all these municipalities that don't need to have delays to delay. And of course, in the end, if the people in those municipalities think that their town council people are manipulating the process, they still have the option at the ballot box to reprimand or replace those people. And generally speaking, if it does become public knowledge that there is some problem, then there will be a backlash. So there's a danger of it, but I think that danger is relatively minimal.
The legislation that we were talking about is Senate Bill 722. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to carolinajournal.com and find the column with the headline, Unnecessarily Delaying Elections Denies Voting Rights. Its author is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.